All right, so we're going to kind of pick up where we left off last week or thereabouts and talk some more about this idea of getting ready and preparing ourselves for the personal Christmas, the Christmas in our lives, the mystical experience, the awareness of the Christ within. When we were talking in the discussion group a few months ago, we were listening to some of Carl Jung's lectures, and these were very close to the end of his life. I think he was up in well into his 80s at the time, and giving these lectures, still smoking his pipe, and he was talking about how the conscious mind, the intellect, the part of us that is aware that it is aware, cannot communicate directly with the subliminal part of the mind. So the subliminal part is fully functioning, it is aware, it is intelligent, it has its own motivations, it seems, its own desires. But yet there's a part of us that is not aware of what it's doing and what it wants. So at times we are motivated, almost compelled, you might say. We are motivated by forces we don't really understand, and they are within us. They are part of us. So then you start to get into the shadow self and embracing the shadow and all these other things that we get from Jungian psychology. How can we kind of really understand ourselves if we don't find a way to understand that? In the East, we have this idea of integral yoga, which is taking everything, combining everything, and they're talking about not just our humanity but our divinity as well, the presence of the soul, or the oversoul, as Emerson would call it. That you and I, each one of us, are little expressions of that same life, that same oversoul. The divinity is already within. So Jung was talking about symbols, and he wrote a book in the 50s called Man and His Symbols, and I've read most of it a couple times. I get halfway through it or so, and then kind of lose interest in it. But it's very interesting. I think it's very very important in light of what we're talking about here this week. And what he was saying is that the conscious mind, the awareness part of our mind, cannot communicate directly with the subliminal part of our mind. But it can start to interpret the symbols or understand the symbols. And this is why he was into dream analysis. That when we are dreaming, the conscious part of our mind is kind of put on the back burner. It's not entirely aware. It's not entirely unconscious, but not entirely aware. But the subconscious is speaking to us in symbols in the dreams, or the dreams are the symbols of the subconscious. Let's put it that way. And that if we can recall the dreams and we can start to look at those symbols, then we can learn something about what's going on in the subliminal or subconscious. Kind of uses those terms interchangeably. Now, the importance of that, the reason I bring it up today, is that he was saying that the same symbolism appears in different cultures over different times, different places, but the same symbols are there and they seem to have the same meanings. Excuse me, I have to get some water here. The heat was running a lot last night and the air's pretty dry here. So you have to wonder, you have to wonder how and why is it that people in far-flung corners of the earth would develop the same symbols, have the same symbols, and mythologies develop around the symbolism. It's as if there is something there that is common to all of us that is trying to bubble up and tell us something, or at least it is bubbling, it is churning it, and we may or may not become aware of it. But if we choose to become aware of it, we can find that these symbols are there. That's kind of the nutshell of what I got out of what he was talking about in those lectures and in the book Man and His Symbols. Now, Joseph Campbell did a lot of work with the mythologies of the world, and he started to point out that the same general mythologies exist in many parts of the world. Now, the mythology, and he's quoting another German philosopher, I believe, that there's these kind of primordial impulses that exist within humanity, and we become aware of them, and we costume them and color them in the characters that are appropriate to our particular culture. But if we peel away those cultural differences and we look at the essence of the mythology, we find that it is trying to tell us very much the same thing, at least in Campbell's analysis. So here's an example of this. In North America, I believe it was in the Algonquian people, there was this mythology of a young man who appeared one day to a young Indian man. And this visitor, this strange visitor, became friends with this young fellow. And he challenged him to a wrestling match. And the two would wrestle and they would compete. And they did this for some time. And finally the newcomer said, "Listen, today when we wrestle, you are going to beat me. And after you beat me, you must cut off my head and bury it in the soil." And the young boy didn't want to do that, but he realized that this was no ordinary person, that this was some kind of a god who had appeared to him. So reluctantly he obeyed. And where the head of this mysterious visitor was planted, well, that's where the first corn stalk came up. See, corn was a very important food substance in that culture. And the interpretation of the mythology is that the food is a gift from the gods. And then Campbell shifts all the way over to the South Pacific. And in the South Pacific, there's a mythology of this young princess. And this young princess went down to the lagoon to bathe one day, and this giant eel came up and swam and brushed up against her. And it startled her. And the eel went up on the shore and morphed into a handsome young man. Clearly, this was no ordinary person. And they became friends. And he told her one day, he says, "Today, you're going to have to kill me and cut off my head and plant my head in the soil." And she didn't want to do it. But she realized that this was no ordinary person. This was some form of a god. So she did as she was instructed, and she planted his head into the soil. And it was there the first coconut tree grew. So here you have these two stories from two different parts of the world about the origin of food, the mythology of the origin of food. Very similar in their essence, kind of different in the culture, the costumes and the culture, but trying to communicate, if you will, the same essential message. And you find different mythologies as you go around the world about the origin of food. In the Plains Indians out west, you had the mythology of the white buffalo calf woman. So the point I'm trying to make there, the point I'm trying to get to with this is that there's a part of us that already knows something or believes something at least. And it speaks to us in symbols. We can't get it directly, but there's something there that seems to be known, and known not just to one person or one one group of people in one place at one time, but it is known to many different cultures, many different people in many places at many times. Sometimes when we start to study world religions and teachings, we get into this idea of the esoteric teachings. And esoteric means obscured or hidden. Now sometimes people will say, well, the meaning was obscured in order to keep people who weren't quite advanced enough or mature enough from understanding and misusing the power. And that may be true. There may be some truth to that. But I think there's another way of looking at it. And I think that the teaching is obscured because it is speaking in symbols. It is speaking to us in symbols that we don't understand. So what we want to try to do as we look into this season, remember last week I suggested that we should each find the personal meaning in Christmas. What does this mean to me? What does this mean to us? Meister Eckhart telling his congregation around 1300, if you don't know what Christmas means to you personally, it may as well never happened. Now, if we look at this time of the year, if we look at this season around the solstice, there is a symbolism there that appears in many different cultures. There's something going on there. There's something that is trying to bubble out of that part of the mind that knows and is speaking to the self-aware part of the mind in symbols. Remember last week I related to you the teaching story that we got from Jewish mysticism of how when the soul decides to incarnate, it picks its circumstances, and it picks a family, and it picks a body, and it comes into the womb, and it is accompanied by an angel. The angel tells it everything that it needs to know. See? And just before that child is born, or at least when it's time for the angel to leave, the angel taps the baby on its lips with its finger, which puts that little indent under the nose. And then the child forgets. It consciously forgets what it was told, but subliminally it remembers. See? And this is kind of given by way of explanation. What we're doing is we are remembering our way back home. We are unfolding, as Joel Goldsmith says it. We are uncovering a little bit every day, a little bit more every day. We are uncovering the truth that already lies within us. So as I mentioned last week, when the early Christian church wanted to have the celebration of the birth of Jesus, they had to decide when they were going to establish the holiday. When was it going to be? Excuse me, I'm getting more water. And there were many celebrations around the winter solstice. And in Rome, which was their primary audience at the time where they were trying to grow, there was a feast called Saturnalia, which went on for days. And apparently they tried to discourage it because there was a lot of drinking and eating and other things going on, and they wanted to discourage people from that. So that was one reason that they put it on top of Saturnalia. But I think there's deeper reasons that we have to look at. Why do people in the Northern Hemisphere, why do they want to celebrate at the solstice in December, and in the Southern Hemisphere at the solstice in June? What is it about that event, you see, that kind of awakens the urge within humanity to celebrate, to have rituals, to recognize. And what happens at the solstice is that the days begin to get longer again. Not a whole lot longer, just a tiny little bit longer than it was yesterday. But where we are now, we're heading into that solstice, and every day, if you look out the window at sunset, every day that sun is going down just a few minutes before it did yesterday, and in a slightly different location. Right? It's kind of proceeding southwest on the horizon. But when we get to the solstice, it stops marching south. It pauses for a day or so, I believe. Could be wrong about that, but I think it does. I think it kind of stays there for one day or so. And then it slowly comes north again. And as it does, the days grow longer. The days grow longer. And the ancient peoples, people who lived closer to the nature, to soil, to we were talking about gardening earlier. The people who lived closer to nature, the people whose livelihood depended on, whose life depended on crops and animals, see, they saw something in that. They recognized something in that. And that something was worth celebrating. And what that is, even though it is a tiny, tiny shift, it is a fulfillment of the promise of a future. Because if the sun were to keep going south, and it kept getting darker and darker and darker and darker, life would end. Life as we know it would end on this planet. If you think about it, all life that we have on this planet, all life, here on the surface at least, all life requires the sun. The sun heats the water of the ocean and evaporates it. The sun heats the land differently and causes the air there to rise, which creates a difference in pressure that moves the air from the sea over, the wind, and brings us the rain. And it feeds our food. I love when we were studying Thich Nhat Hanh a couple of weeks ago, and he said, can you look at the tree? Can you look at the tree and see the sunshine and the rain and the soil? How the sunshine, how the rain, how the soil becomes the tree, how it becomes the plants that we eat, how it becomes the food that the animals eat and the milk that the animals give to us. Without the sun, all life as we know it would disappear. So for the people who understood this, you see, the fact that the sun was coming back, light was coming back, was very, very significant. These people had an understanding that they were part of this bigger whole. As Wendy said, we can think, we can feel, we can hear, we can see. And it causes us to recognize the great wonder that we are a part of. And I just kind of imagine people pausing in the great wonder that life was returning, life was coming back. That which appeared to be dead, we were talking about our lawns browning out and being covered with leaves, that which appeared to be dead, in the spring will come back to life. There will be a renewal of life. The animals will give their offspring, the plants will grow, and all of that, for those who are attuned to nature, all of that wonder is present in that moment when the sun starts to return its march to the north. Now, I know I mentioned some time ago that there was a religion in Egypt, and they built their temples in the form of a cow. In order to get into the temple, they had to enter in through a body part of the cow. In order to get back out into the world, the doors were placed into a body part of the cow. And we, in our times, looking back at that, we might think, well, those people were just superstitious. You know, they thought that the cow was God. But there was a deeper meaning there. There was a deeper symbolism there. The cow represented the wonder to them. The cow takes in grass and produces the very milk that they needed to give to their children. The cow produces the very milk that it needs to give to its calf. The calf comes out of the cow. And if they stopped and paused and participated in that wonder, see, then they could say, where is the magnificence that made this so? Thich Nhat Hanh says, can you see the sunshine and the rain and the soil and the trees? Can you look at the cow and see the miracle of life? The miracle of life. So people can get in tune with this symbolism, this esoteric meaning, these esoteric teachings. They can start to see these meanings that are speaking to them in symbols. And at this time of the year, at the solstice, we have the same connection. There's something there already, and people are kind of connecting to it through their own culture, through their own religion, through their own beliefs. They look at it and say, that's what that means. That's what that's all about. See. In Christianity, we are told that Jesus came at this time of the year and he was the light of the world. In Judaism, we have Hanukkah, the festival of the lights, the celebration of the lights. Also at this time of the year, you see. And if you go back and you read the mythology, you go back and you read the story of Hanukkah and why we have the menorah with the candles on it, is there was not enough oil to burn the lamp. There was a lamp that had to be lit at all times. And there was not enough oil to keep it going for the number of days it would take somebody to go and get more oil and come back. This is, I'm really paraphrasing it here. This is a very, very scattered understanding of it. So the lamp was only supposed to burn for 7 days because that's how much oil they had. But by a miracle, it continued to burn. Now, we can look at that and say, what is this about the light burning? The light continuing to burn was taken as a sign that God was with them. The presence of God is with them, you see. So light has this symbolism, and it is tied to the cultures, and it is tied to the rituals. And the light returning, the light returning is a symbol that God is with us. Whose hand moves the sun in the heavens? Whose intelligence created the miracle of the cow and the trees and our lungs and all of these things? So if we stay with it, if we stay with this idea, we start to recognize that there's something very special about this time of the year. And this is why Christmas is placed at this time of the year. In the book of Genesis, in the very, very beginning of the first book of the Bible as we know it here, right? It starts off and it says, in the beginning. That sun coming back is a new beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the first day God created light. The first act of creation, well, he created the heaven and the earth, but the first day on earth, he created the light and separated the light from the darkness. Now, there's something very interesting in that symbolism, because it wasn't until the third day that the sun was created, the sun and the moon. How was there light before there was sun? There's another meaning. There's another meaning there. And if we look into that meaning, the word that was used for light meant enlightenment, consciousness, awareness, perception, knowing, the first act of creation. So now we say that enlightenment, not just a symbol of the sunshine, but the growth of knowing, the growth of enlightenment, the unfolding of consciousness, as Joel Goldsmith would put it. Remember, I used a model for, I call it the maturation of consciousness, and there's probably a better term, but that's the one that I use. And I just use a 3-level model, and some psychologists use an 8-level model, but for me, 3 levels worked for what I was doing at the time. But the first level that we find ourselves in as human beings, when we start to experience life around us, is everything is out there. See, all of the power is out there. It's in our parents, it's in our teachers, it's in our government, it's all out there. Everything is out there and it is external to us. And if we wish to have anything, because as children we have nothing, think of a baby coming into the world completely helpless without an adult to take care of it. We have to learn how to get those who have it to give it to us. It's kind of a manipulation, if you want to call it that. But we have to learn how to please that power out there, So our parents tell us, well, if you get good grades, I'll take you to Disney World or whatever. So now we are pleasing our parents in order to get what we want. And our approach to religion, our approach to the divinity is kind of like that. God is like a Santa Claus God. God is this old guy with a white beard, sits on a throne up in heaven and keeps a list of who's naughty and nice and who's going to get rewarded and who's going to get punished. And that's the kind of the view that we start out with. But we grow out of that, you see. We unfold into a different level. It's important for us at the beginning. We have to understand things at the level we're capable of understanding. But after a while, we start to think more deeply. We enter a level that I call gnosis, Gnosis. We don't just want to understand things as we were told. We want to understand a little bit more about them, why they are that way. So as Emmett Fox tells us, the commandment, thou shalt not steal, that's a good commandment for people who would take each other's shoes. Certainly nothing wrong with telling people thou shalt not steal. But do you really think that God came down and made the ground shake and burned as a bush that did not consume and told Moses, tell them not to steal? Or is there a deeper meaning there, you see? So this is kind of the search for the hidden or the esoteric knowledge. This is a symbol that we're working with. And what is that the symbol of, and why do we need to understand this? And this begins kind of, I call it our quest of understanding, our quest of knowing. And we study in books, we study with teachers, we take classes, we listen to talks on tape. We do all of these things to start to grow and to kind of figure out, what is this really trying to tell us? And then at some point, we discover, as Dr. Holmes tells us, that the one who can teach us is already here within. And that's the only one who can teach us. that's the best teacher for us. That knowledge is already within us. But we were hit on the lip by the angel and we forgot, but not entirely. It continues to speak to us in the symbols of the subliminal mind until we start to awaken to it, until we start to perceive, to know without process. And so if you think of how we learn things in our normal way, we have a teacher or we have a book and they give us a theory and then they give us some experiments to conduct and say, now if you do this and this and this, then because of what we told you in that book, you'll discover what it's true. Think of mathematics, for example. But there's a different level of knowing. There is an intuitive knowing. A way of knowing without going through that process. A way of simply knowing, being aware. And this is, as I said last week, this is getting into the ineffable. How do you know that you know if there's not a process of knowing? And we could say, well, I don't know how I know without a process of knowing. I just know that I know. There are things that are more appropriately called revelations to us. An attunement, as I talked about a few weeks ago, an attunement. Now, I believe that there's part of us that is aware of these things all along, and that is why we are drawn to the symbols. We are drawn to the symbolism. We listen to the parables and the teaching stories. And we're going to go into these Christmas narratives next week, the Sunday before Christmas. There's something within them that strikes a chord with us, even if we are not entirely aware of what that chord is. There's just a little something within us that goes, yes. But eventually we start to move out of the quest for external knowledge, and we turn to the inner revelation. The inner revelation. This is the enlightenment. This is the enlightenment that I think we're talking about. This is the light that we wish to come into our lives at this time of the year. Not just the physical sunshine coming back, which is a miracle enough, but this enlightenment that is the intimate knowledge through experience that the presence of God is with us. The oil lamp burning after it should have been extinguished because it should not have had oil to burn. But that light burning represented the presence of God with us. Moses on the mountain, in the presence of the fire that burns but does not consume. The presence of God is with us. And this symbolism exists. If you go back and read through the Old Testament, the symbolism exists. Elijah carried up to heaven in a chariot of fire. The light, the enlightenment. See, we don't have the words. We don't have the words to describe it. And this is where we step into the ineffable. I mentioned last week Richard Maurice Buck's book on cosmic consciousness, and one of the characteristics that he found in his going through list of people who he believed had such an experience is surrounded by the light. Surrounded by the light. A light so bright that they couldn't see anything. A light that should not have existed because it was nighttime, and yet they were surrounded by the light. we can't find words to describe that which is ineffable. But that doesn't stop us from trying. Paul was knocked off his horse and blinded by the light, you see. So as we move into this Christmas season, and I invited everyone last week to consider, well, what does that mean to you personally? I invite you this week to consider that it is a season of revelation to you, where something comes into your being, a knowing, a certainty, an experience of the presence of the divine within, which is what we call the Christ. It is not something that happened a long time ago in a far, far away place, but it is something that is happening all the time. We just take time at this part of the year to pay particular attention to it, to open ourselves up to it. And we have some kind of examples, if you will. We have some kind of guidance that is given to us, if you will. If we wish this experience, as I said last week, you can't force it, but you can prepare yourself. You can make yourself, I call it making yourself available to it. And it requires the stillness of the mind, right? Well, why does Christmas come on a cold winter night? Because it's still, you see, the still of the night, the stillness. We were given the example of Mary, you know, and the angel comes to her, Gabriel, and tells her the presence is within you. It's with you right here, right now. And she says, I don't understand this. My intellect can't handle this. I don't understand this. But if this is God's will, let it be. Right? The theologians call it the great fiat, the great act of faith of Mary. Are we willing to receive? Are we willing to say, I don't understand it? It goes beyond the intellect, right? Remember we talk of the intellect likes to analyze, it likes to divide, it likes to weigh, it likes to measure, it likes to make judgments, it likes to do all of these things. And yet that which we are talking about can't be weighed, can't be analyzed, can't be measured, can't be judged. It is beyond all of that. It is before all of that. It is before thoughts, but that from which thoughts come. So for this week, I ask you to consider your willingness to receive. Your willingness to have the revelation of that which is already within you, has always been within you, will always be with you, but which you may not have always been consciously aware. Are you willing to let it reveal itself to you? As John had the revelation in the book of Revelation, are you willing to let it be that fire that consumes? Fire that burns but does not consume, excuse me. Okay? The fire of the presence. You ever seen when you're driving around town the Methodist churches and they have the cross and it has the flame wrapped around it? Right? The fire of the Holy Spirit. There's a little prayer we had when I was a kid. Very short, very sweet. Come Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle within them the fire of your love. The fire of your love, the light, the enlightenment. So I invite you this week to just be still. Just be still. And as Joel Goldsmith says, just sit for no other reason. For no other reason. Not to ask for anything, not to talk to God about anything, not to do anything. For no other reason than to experience the presence. To invite the presence. To be like Mary and say, I don't understand it, but if this is God's will, let it be. The gifts have been given. The presence is within. The symbols have been there. They have been bubbling up through the consciousness of mankind for thousands and thousands of years. But as Eckhart said 700 years ago, to his congregation, if you don't know what that means to you personally, it might well have never happened. Is this the year? Is this the year that we know personally what it means to us, that we accept it, that we invite it, and that we are patient with it? I'm trying to think whether it's from Buddhism or Hinduism, I'm not sure which, doesn't really matter, but there was a teaching parable there of two students who went to the master. And one student said to the master, he said, will I ever attain enlightenment? And the master said, yes. Now there's something in their culture that was called a kalpa, which is like, 20,000 years or something like that. And the teacher said, every kalpa, a crow flies over the Himalayas with an abrasive like a piece of sandpaper. And when that crow has worn the Himalayas flat, you shall achieve enlightenment. And the student went away muttering, that's too long. I can't wait that long. That's forever and ever and ever. I want it now. Oh God, give me patience now. I want it now. And another student went and asked the same question, was given the same answer. And the student went away happy and said, oh good, my success is assured. It's just going to take a little time. So give yourself some time. Give yourself some patience. I'm not saying, don't say, I'm going to put it off forever. But set your intention. Last week I said, what's your intention for this Christmas season? Set your intention. Is your intention for this Christmas season to accept the gifts, to realize the gifts, to experience the gifts? Not the physical gifts, the spiritual gifts of the experience, the conscious awareness. This is Dr. Holmes' words, the conscious awareness of the experience of the presence of the divine. That's the gift we want to unwrap this year. Next week we're going to talk about the symbolism in the Christmas stories of the New Testament, how they're kind of speaking to us in symbols, kind of showing us what's going on. But it's not just a story about something that happened a long, long time ago. Right? It's your story. It's my story. It's our story. And that's next week. And so it is. And Reverend Laurie has picked out a treatment for us